Well, that's nice. You got a closed off piece of your house.
Yeah, exactly. It contains my workspace a little bit here.
I mean, for all anybody knows, it's like you're living in a crack house, you know. It's like right behind you, but it
No one will
looks
ever know.
it looks good.
So maybe what we'll do is I'll kind of like formally introduce you, and then I'll
Go ahead.
just, yeah, we'll just go with the flow here. So
Ask me whatever you want.
beautiful. I'm here with Dr. Fred Luskin, and I'm so grateful that you joined me. I'll give you the introduction that you rarely give yourself. I notice in almost every talk I've listened to that you typically introduce yourself by saying, "My name's Fred." and I like that about you. But I'll go ahead and add some color to that. So Dr. Luskin is one of the world's leading experts in forgiveness and has done the largest study on forgiveness to date, and is the director of the Stanford Forgiveness Projects, and teaches forgiveness publicly, has written 3 widely read books: Forgive for Good, Stress Free for Good, and then Forgive for Love. And so I invited you on to talk about forgiveness. So let's
Good.
talk. And I thought I want to start by just kind of sharing my interpretation. I've read 2 out of the 3 of those books so far, and I have
Okay.
a sense of, forgiveness as far as you conceive of it and how to facilitate it. But I'd love to hear you elaborate on my interpretation. So my interpretation is that, essentially forgiveness is a trainable skill that involves cultivating peacefulness and reducing the stress response, because as you've said, the adrenaline backed nervous system is not conducive to forgiveness. It's very conducive to enemies and perceiving threats. So, my understanding of your strategy is that forgiveness has a lot to do with just cultivating peacefulness and letting that peacefulness guide you. So can you just elaborate on that, on your understanding of forgiveness and your approach to facilitating it?
I mean that's that's a very clear and like taking yourself out of the equation way of seeing my work. The only piece that would be missing from that is some of the conceptual stuff. That forgiveness is multiple things. It's making peace with the word no, so that you understand that not getting what you want is a part of life, and learning to be at peace with that is an essential skill. The other conceptual piece that is maybe more Buddhist in origin, or is that life just happens, and then our particular interests and attachments and desires and things cause us to make from that flow of life certain things particularly desirable or certain things not desirable. So something happened. We don't like something. We wish it hadn't happened. We do things that keep that alive in our head in a negative way. And then we blame that experience or another person or an event for why we feel bad. Forgiveness is allowing what you refer to as peace, is simply to allow life to be as is. It just happens. Stuff happens, life happens, things we call good happen, things we call not so good happen. They all happen. And forgiveness is like going from basically accepting to upset to back down to accepting. So the piece in the middle, the grievance, soothes itself out and just go back to, that's my life.
Mm.
So that's the peace piece. The piece of it is it's my life. It's what happened. It's the way this life was expected or intended to be. So those are the only things that I would add to
Yeah.
what you had described.
And when I when I apply that to what we might describe as like ridiculous grievances, it's very easy to see how that makes sense. How, how just frankly silly we are in all the ways that we resist what is and what has come to be. But when I'm sure, maybe there are even people
So
listening.
what would you say is an example of a
Hmm.
ridiculous grievance?
Someone maybe cutting me off on the road, someone taking too long at a grocery store, someone even
Right.
speaking rudely to me, a student walking in late to my classroom and being noisy, things like that, or my child, having a little tantrum. I think it's a bit ridiculous to resist that and hold on to grudges around minor inconveniences like that. But when I try to kind of apply that to more extreme things, and I know that you have helped people with the most extreme forms of trauma, so it's perfectly reasonable, I think, for a child to think it's not okay that my parent is abusing me, or for a
Mhm.
woman to think it was not okay to have been assaulted. So how do you apply this to those grievances that are kind of well based, when you really have a basis for resisting what happened?
I think there's a difference between a child and an adult. So if you get a kid, it's important to teach that child um, discernment, boundaries, decision making around safety. And so, yes, it's very important to let that child know that certain harmful behaviors are not okay. At the same time, you can also let that child know that they have some choice as to how they deal with behaviors that they call not okay.
Mm.
So that the fact that most people deny the capacity for choice in that experience is what is so limiting about human consciousness and causes so much both hostility and violence. That yes, you make a good point that of course you want to instruct a kid, no, it's not okay to hit, no, it's not okay for parents or anybody to lie, no, it's all these things are not okay. Because you're teaching them so that they have inner structures to create character for themselves. You don't necessarily want to teach them just so they can practice responses to that. But you have to understand the difference between that. Secondly, is even if it's not okay, that doesn't mean that that is the end of your responsibility for your own behavior.
Mm.
It's not okay. Okay, so what? Now what do? You kill somebody? Do you go on a rampage? Do you stop eating? Do you feel bitter? What do you do? So that piece missing from what you're saying is also a limitation. I'm not invalidating the truth of what your statement. Now, for an adult, um, the bigger question is like the Dr. Phil question, like that thing he made famous. How's that working for you? That's the really important question for an adult. And so, yeah, adult can say, okay, yes, it was wrong for you to cheat on me, to his partner. It was wrong. And I can punish you. And that's fine. And now, 3 months later, if I'm still punishing you in my mind or in person, then the question comes, well, is that a good strategy for life?
Mhm.
Or is that a good way to treat somebody that you hope at some point will love you again? Or is that good training for your nervous system as to how to handle adversity? Those are questions that are more challenging to answer. So
Mm.
the kid needs to be told right from wrong. The adult may not know right from wrong, so maybe there needs to be some remedial education. But the bigger question is, what are skillful strategies for dealing with a life where things will happen to you that are difficult and may be ethically and morally wrong?
Mm. Yeah. And one of the things that you just said that really stands out to me is, okay, that was wrong, but that's not the end of my responsibility for how I behave.
Yeah.
That's insightful. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, and when I think about, like different types of forgiveness, I think, and you've written about this and talked about this, that there's such a thing as forgiving. Well, I'll put it this way. You even have said it's really not about forgiving something or forgiving someone. It's more about just becoming a forgiving person, sort of kind of like dispositionally instead of situationally. And so what would you say to someone who is struggling with that, and how, I guess, can you just speak to the difference between forgiving something versus becoming a forgiving person?
Well, if let's say you're in a difficult, intimate partnership, and each partner has its list of grudges and grievances against the other. But you come home and your partner has deliberately or not so deliberately not done something they promised. Like they didn't clean up, or they didn't make you dinner, or whatever, or they did something more destructive than that they broke something. No matter what the relationship is or has been, you still have a choice. We always have a choice. So you can walk into your house and have this like grudge level up to here already by the time you come in. So it don't take much to tip you. And you come in, and let's say your partner swore up and down on 15 Bibles that, you're right, honey, tonight I'm going to make sure there's dinner for you. And you come home, there's no dinner. And not only that, just to spite you, they've taken all the food out of the house. They've broken the oven so you can't cook. They've given away the microwave, and they've turned the table and chairs over. So they are saying, I hate you. And you still can choose. That's unfortunately left out of most of our psychosocial education. Your choice what you do. You can make them wrong. You can hate them. You have so much mental freedom, or you can forgive them, or you can feel compassion for how, God, they must feel and be awful to resort to this. But that choice is in you. It's not in what they did. You walked in, messy house, no cooking. That's the truth. You added the rest. All the drama, all the turmoil, that came from you or me. I hope that helps explain that.
It does. And it's a funny example, but it's a very good one, because I think that's the hardest type of insult to forgive, is when it feels quite personal, like the person knowingly hurt you.
Totally.
Yeah. And what I'm understanding more and more is that forgiveness is very much about taking back your own freedom and power to to control your own emotional and behavioral response to situations. And
well, you gave it away in the first place.
Right.
So now you're just taking it back to where it belongs.
Right. One of the things that really stands out to me too, that you emphasize, is the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's an important thing for people to understand, that forgiveness is not forgetting, it's not condoning, and it's not even necessarily reconciliation, right?
Not at all.
So tell me, I mean, I'll let you just kind of respond, but my sense is that you wouldn't try to give advice to someone about whether they should reconcile a relationship. Perhaps my guess would be that your guidance would be become clear-headed, lucid, and peaceful, and use your own discernment about whether this relationship is worth reconciling. But either way, you can forgive.
That's true. I might nudge people to reconcile if it's safe and makes sense.
If it's safe and
But
makes sense.
yeah, but the safety piece is crucial.
Mm,
So if you're going back into a place where it's likely you're going to be beaten,
mm-hmm.
then the forgiveness does not give you latitude to do self-destructive acts.
Mm.
That we used to say all the time, forgiveness is not the same as getting a lobotomy. Like, you still have to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The key distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation is, again, you're with a life partner, they cheat on you. Okay. They come home and you find out that, again, they just had sex with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, whatever. I mean, it could be whatever, awful, whatever. And you then say to yourself, well, obviously this is not a relationship that I wish to stay in. So we're done. However, 3-4 months later, you can make peace with them, say, hey, unskillful, stupid, whatever. Lots of people do unskillful, stupid things. I don't need to hold on to this, but I don't want them back in my life. So you forgive them 3 or 4 months later, and you don't reconcile. But 3 or 4 months later, maybe in a different world, you say, oh, shit. I just realized how awful I was for the year before this, that I was busy, I was distracted, I was tense, I was curt. It's amazing that they stayed that long with me. And, I'm not advocating it, but maybe I might have had an affair too if I wasn't neglectful, if they were as neglectful as I was. So now that I'm not so offended and hurt by this, maybe I'll give them a call, apologize, ask for an apology, and see, is there a place to move forward? So that's the difference between reconciliation and not. The forgiveness stays the same.
Mm.
In the converse, like, somebody can have an affair and you can have 2 kids at home. And you could say to yourself, 1, I'm not going anywhere. It's not worth the financial thing. And 2, I don't want to blow up a family. But you can be downright nasty to your partner. So you can reconcile, but not forgive at all.
Interesting, right?
So they're different qualities.
Mm.
I hope that explains it.
Yes, it does. And I hadn't actually thought about that last point, that you can reconcile without forgive and just be in a bitter, resentful relationship, which is
all the time it happens.
Right. You also talk about how forgiveness is not, you're not making yourself a doormat. You're not by becoming a forgiving person, it's not that you're allowing people to walk all over you. So can you speak to that? Like, why is that true? That by becoming a forgiving person, that doesn't mean that you just let people walk all over you.
I would hope that if you became more forgiving, you wouldn't need such tight boundaries and you wouldn't be so prickly. Because some of what we define walking over us is our issue, not theirs.
Mm.
So, you're married to somebody again, and I don't know, they eat your cookies. It's like big deal. You don't need to even worry about that. But some people can take offense.
Mm.
Your friend's late. You know, if they've been a friend for 20 years, like, stop. Like, it's you. Relax. So if you become more forgiving, I think your boundary of self becomes a little less rigid, and you're going to simply not take offense so much if that's good for you.
That makes sense.
The way you don't want to be a doormat is like there still have to be some modest number of behaviors which are harmful. So if somebody drives your kids without a seatbelt, that has nothing to do with forgive or not forgive. The kid needs to be safe. If your partner takes all of your money and spends it on cocaine, that's not a forgiveness thing. That's, again, a safety, like, normal, just, we have to do certain things to be in this world thing. So accepting those is never helpful.
Mm.
So you can forgive the fact that you're in relationship with someone who behaves badly, and you can forgive yourself for choosing badly that person to be in relationship with, and you can very clearly say no.
Mm. Yes.
And one of the dangers is to use a kind of false forgiveness to no longer say no. You know, like, well, I've forgiven them, therefore I have to take everything. It's not true at all.
Mm.
What you want to do when you're asserting yourself, though, is what you want is to, like, assert yourself where it's meaningful. Meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's not so easy.
It's a great point. Yep. And I really like that. Just thinking about, even again, back to the idea of people walking all over me, often that very interpretation is kind of based on a prickly, boundaried sense of self that is very easily offended.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the difference being that if someone is just, constantly taking money from me, telling me they're going to pay me back, but they never do, that starts to become impractical and meaningful to assert myself.
Yeah,
I can forgive them and never lend them money again.
Right, because it's not healthy.
Right.
But, like, I had one time, I had a real boundary issue with a woman that I was with. We went on vacation together, and she grew up in a home where food was more insecure than mine. So we went together on vacation, and she took breakfast stuff from the buffet, put it into the refrigerator, and I didn't recognize that it meant I wasn't supposed to go near it. So she takes it out to have some. Like, she grabs a strawberry, and I grab a strawberry, and she's looking at me like I just robbed a bank. And then she took something, and I took something, and she pulls all the food away from me. And she's, like, covering it up. And both of us got upset, both. Like, I said, what is this? Like, what kind of muddiness is it? We came together, and, in essence, and I'm paying for the room, like, go get more food if you need it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, you just don't understand, and stop invading my space. So we both raised issues. But somehow neither of us brought it, probably because we were reasonably new in a relationship. It didn't become a grievance. It was just two boundaries that were violated. Both of us were wrong to react the way we reacted. Like we both were triggered. The deepest question for all of us is, what do we do when we're triggered? How do we evaluate that? It's not, again, it's not so much at the outside as the inside. So what we, in a kind of narcissistic culture and an entitlement culture, you're always going to be asked about, well, how do you make sure people don't take from you? How do you make sure they don't walk all over you? How do you make sure you assert yourself? Those are all like somewhat self-absorbed questions, which some of them are fine. But other questions might be, well, how do I recognize my own inner wounding? Well, when I'm triggered. How do I recognize my own fear? Well, when somebody takes food from me. How do I recognize where I'm a threat to the relationship? Well, when I overreact to this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different set of questions. You want to be careful not to get so lost in just your own set of questions.
Mm.
And forgiveness provides different questions.
Mm.
How do I make myself less reactive, more tolerant, more capable of making good, strong, assertive reactions, not hostile ones?
Mm.
So
This seems to relate to what you've described as unenforceable rules.
all over the place.
Yes, yes. Which, I think one example of that is essentially trying to control what other people do. No matter how badly you wish that your husband will do the dishes, you can't make him do it. So it's an unenforceable rule. And when we are upset about unenforceable rules being broken, it's kind of a lack of just seeing clearly that was all along an unenforceable rule. I never had control over that.
And the reason we make up these unenforceable rules is because we don't have control. And we feel very vulnerable and scared about not having control. So we try to make believe we have more control than we do. Mm. And we do that by making up rules about other people's behavior. So if I feel vulnerable, like a stalker is full of hundreds of unenforceable rules about what the partner should or shouldn't do and where they shouldn't go, because inside they feel lost and vulnerable all the time.
Right.
A safe, secure person doesn't need to monitor their partner so much because they feel safer inside.
Right.
So they don't have quite as many rules.
Yep.
The rules are there to try to stabilize our vulnerability.
Mm.
It's different than saying, honey, I expect this to be monogamous. I can't force you. Right. Just know that if I find out that it's not, I'm not going to stay. Like that's very different than you have to do something.
Right. It's kind of more of an agreement than a rule.
Yeah. Or here's how I hold things. And I'm not going to hate you if you do this. I'm just letting you know that this is not on my boundary list and it's not acceptable behavior to me.
Yes.
And if you don't want to join me, then we might have to renegotiate because like our desires are incompatible.
Mm. One of the definitions I've heard you give of unforgiveness is narrow threat-based processing. And I really like that. That's incredibly accurate. I think that unforgiveness, like resentment and grudges, it's very narrow and it's very threat-based type of processing. And so I feel like it kind of relates to this overall attempt to protect ourselves against all these threats to our vulnerability.
And that's it.
And one of the, you offer a variety of strategies for forgiveness, very practical and extremely helpful. And one of them that really stands out to me is, maybe it's so obvious that everyone already knows it, but it's good to hear anyway, that forgiveness is for you and no one else. It's all about your well-being. And it really has nothing to do with the person who has hurt you.
It has nothing to do with the past and
Yeah.
that person. It may have to do with the present and that person.
Mm.
So if it's somebody you care for, you might want the relationship to work. If it's somebody who hurt you, in the present, you may choose to confront them.
Mm.
But it's not about the past.
There you go.
It's about the present and what's the best that you can do to live a good life for yourself.
Mm. And I know it's a bit cliche and perhaps overplayed, maybe just in my circle, but the saying is so good that resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die.
That's
And
Nelson Mandela's statement.
Beautiful. And yeah, I mean,
I know.
what a
Well, resentment is like drinking poison and then waiting for your enemy to die.
Home run statement. It's just what so many people need to hear. Can you share with me what has been one of the hardest things that you have personally had to forgive in your life?
There's you can't get to this age without having had a number of things that just have to be overcome. I'll start easily with the reason that I became a forgiveness teacher. And that's because a very close friend abandoned me decades ago. And somebody who was central to my life, and they just, walked out. And took a number of years for me to make any peace out of it. But I did, and we're now the absolute best of friends again. And that taught me much of what I needed to learn about forgiveness. I mean, it was a devastating experience for me at the time that somebody who had been just an absolute best buddy. And, things in life shifted, and he did this and that and the other thing. And then 5 years later, we came back together, and I had cleansed my heart, and I don't think we've had a speed bump since, but it was all internal. More challenging later in life was certain experiences that happened with my in-laws. I had a long, successful marriage, but relationship with her parents was very challenging. And there were a couple of times where she and I fought like crazy, either going to her parents' house or coming back from her parents' house. And we ended up expressing a lot of negativity between us because at that time we felt no capacity to deal with them. I mean, again, another displacement. But the quality that I write about in the book called positive intention, that came to me a while ago. Not when I went to visit her parents, and her mother said something that just irritated the hell out of me. And I went storming out their back door, and I went running, and I didn't come back for like 2 hours. And she figured I'd gone back to California and left them. And I was furious for, 45 minutes. And then I started to realize this is pretty stupid, Fred. your mother-in-law, and yeah, she's difficult and irritating and all those things, and but she's your mother-in-law. So I asked myself, this is how this came, and this was after I had been teaching this for probably a decade. I can't know, but the clarity of it. But I asked myself, so why do you visit your in-laws? You don't like them, and they don't like you. So why do you visit? You certainly don't visit to get pissed off all the time. Well, maybe that's why you do visit, because that appears to be what happens. So maybe that's what you want. And a friend of mine gave me some real wake up one time, because I called them from where my in-laws lived, and I said, you won't believe what my mother-in-law did. And he said, of course I do. You call up and complain about her every time you go visit. So, they all got the repetitive pattern of it except me. So I asked myself, what is it? Why do you go? And I realized that I go to support my wife and help my kids, have a relationship with their grandparents. So then the very unpleasant and uncomfortable thought came to me, well then, Fred, why don't you act like that? So if you wanted your wife to feel supported, storming out over her mother is not going to get you there. Mm. And it's not always about you. So you're going to have to be nicer to her. And you're going to have to give your kids a hell of a lot better model of how to behave, because they're just learning how dad's a jerk. And so I had to change myself, because my true motivation was support my wife and try to give my kids a decent relationship with their grandparents. Mm. But it required me to change my story from my mother-in-law is a pain in the ass to I'm here for positive reasons. She's difficult. That's fine. Rose has its thorns. But I took her out of the center of the story and put the appropriate thing at the center of the story. And that's when the forgiveness teaching got more powerful. Mm. Was when I could teach other people to do that too. So not to just focus on what you don't like and don't want, but focus on what your positive goal is. Mm. So that's a very instructive experience for me, because I was unable to control myself in their presence. I mean, I didn't have any governors, and I complained about them all the time. And, a good part of it was justified, but it was the wrong question I was asking myself. So those are two instructive moments for me on the power of forgiveness, because once I changed that story, well, so she's annoying, so what? It's
Thank you for sharing that. So there's a couple questions that come to my mind. One is, sometimes I feel like there's something peculiar in the human psyche that is actually attracted to pain. A somewhat emotional masochism in a way, where and it's almost like people in some cases don't want to let go of their upset. Right. So it's very peculiar, but it's pretty consistent. Yeah. And so, what are your thoughts on that, and what to do in a situation like this, where a person, it's almost exhilarating to replay the grievance again and go and feel the feelings again. And there's a self-righteousness often that comes with it. So how would you kind of address this pattern?
We don't have enough guidance and training on actual happiness. Mm. And we don't have enough experience with the warm, loving qualities. So we're willing to settle for fool's gold. Mm. So it's better, I think, to feel angry or righteous than to feel weak.
Mm.
And so if those are the choices that you know, like either I can feel stepped on by my wife's parents or ignored or minimized, those are very uncomfortable experiences. So since I didn't want to experience those, I was willing to feel hostility and belligerent and self-righteous, because those feel a little more powerful.
Mm.
So many of us just stick with that kind of power. What I didn't recognize is the power that's even deeper of acceptance and compassion and forgiveness, and even some gratitude for the good that they did. I mean, they weren't all bad, but it took me a while to grow enough to feel the deeper experiences of happiness. And when you don't have access to them or you don't understand them, you again settle for the kind of fool's gold of, well, at least I'm better than they are.
Right.
Or, you know, those shits aren't going to take advantage of me again. But it's better than abject depression or emptiness, but it's not good enough.
Mm. Yes. Good answer. I think that's accurate. I also want to ask you about two things. One, I noticed that, we talked like right off the bat here that forgiveness has a lot to do with bringing about a peaceful state of mind, so that, which is actually conducive to forgiveness. And I know that you are very practical in your approach to helping people cultivate peace, which I really like. It's a psychophysiological set of factors that need to be in place for forgiveness to happen. And so you have people practice slow diaphragmatic breathing, and you have people, turn their attention to the kindness and beauty all around them in this present moment, which is, very powerful. And I also think sometimes I notice that in myself and in others, I think some people try gratitude practices and they work to some degree, but sometimes I feel like what they really need is an experiential contrast. And that if you're really going to appreciate how soft and comfortable your bed is, go sleep outside on the ground one night. And the next night back in your bed, you'll really feel a sense of gratitude that you couldn't really think yourself into if you didn't have this like perceptual contrast of how uncomfortable that really was. And I guess this isn't exactly a question. It's just commentary on, how we can help people feel more grateful. And our world, many people who have many privileges are so incredibly comfortable that they just no longer have any perceptual contrast of what discomfort really is like, and how grateful we can be for all of these creaturely comforts. But just kind of forcing yourself to be uncomfortable, or meeting people who are, truly inconsiderate or something like that, can really put things into perspective. So yeah, I guess
one of the simplest things to remember is that gratitude can be, or should be, for the simplest of things. In a hyper consumer culture like ours, we've lost the understanding of how lucky we simply are to have running water. And so we look for too much to make us grateful. So a fancy vacation, a new something exciting. But I think that's a very shallow way of looking at gratitude. it's also not that helpful. But if if you stopped and just looked at an apple before you ate it and realized, like, you don't have any idea where an apple comes from, and you don't know anything about anything. So just be appreciative of the fact that some intelligence much greater than yours figured out how to make an apple that you could eat, and that all these people all over the world like did their labor so you could get this apple here. So you want to make it simple, or again, that discomfort piece. If you just hold your breath for a minute, you'll be very grateful for breathing. And so you want to be careful to resist the wealthy culture's disease of needing so much to cross that gratefulness threshold that becomes silly. But if when you take a breath, you realize how lucky you are to still be here, and that you have no idea what breathing actually is and what starts your life and what ends your life, and it's all a mystery. So just be grateful for the chance to be in that mystery for a while. Gratitude applied small is an incredibly powerful thing.
Yes. So in our 10 or so more minutes that we have, I want to ask you about self-forgiveness. And I want to do a little experiment here because, I've certainly had to learn how to forgive myself. And probably still I'm working on that with certain things. But I have someone in mind who is one of the most important people in my life and is extremely unforgiving of himself. And so I want to ask you some questions about this. And in a way, I think my goal is to kind of channel him and imagine and kind of push back in all the ways I imagine he would push back, to kind of see where we can get with the most resistant unforgiveness. So I know, and I'll back up a little bit and say too, I remember reading in your book, Forgive for Good, that when you initially started teaching public classes, it was only then that people started asking you about self-forgiveness, and that at first you weren't quite sure how to guide them with it. But then, of course, you kind of figured it out, but that it was, something that came to you a little bit later than the other types of forgiveness, forgiving other people. So I'll just ask you kind of open-endedly here at first. How can people forgive themselves?
Well, the quick and dirty answer is the one that you offered like 45 minutes ago, is be at peace. So even your friend who is not at peace with themselves, if they could sit in the sun and relax their body and feel the warmth of the sun's rays, and breathe in and out thankfulness for being alive and for the miracle of abundance of that warmth. Or if they can remember some time when they were loved and breathe appropriately so they can feel that in a relaxed way. Once even for a second, they touch real peacefulness, their grudge is gone. It's gone. They can bring it back, but it's gone. And the way into your friend is to remind him that he has that choice, that he can relax and let go and appreciate and open, not to anything in specific, just inside, and be at peace. And once you're at peace, even if it's for 15 seconds, you're at peace with your whole life. And then a little aspect of your life comes back and it disturbs your peace. Well, that's fine. We each have different things that disturb our peace. That's just how we're made. When it's criticism of self that disturbs your peace, you just first want to identify it. Oh, here's a self-attack coming that will disturb my peace. Okay, maybe I need to learn something. By the 20th practice, you'll look at it as, why would I want to harm myself? Like, why am I doing this? What would I possibly be wanting to throw a self-attack around again to disturb my peace when I can, I've told myself this now 7 times. You didn't like the fact that you treated somebody badly or made a mistake or anything. Those are legit. But by the 10th time, I really don't need it.
Yeah.
Let me just let it go and go back to peace.
And that's the thing, I think, with the person I'm thinking of, and with many people, is that this super harsh self-criticism just rears its head over and over and over again. And I remember too reading that you kind of categorize different types of self-resentment,
Right.
different
Right.
reasons,
Yeah, the 4
Yes.
kinds of it.
Yes. And one of them is basically when you are unforgiving toward yourself because you feel like you've hurt people in your
Right.
life.
Sure.
And I imagine perhaps that's one of the hardest to forgive yourself for.
That's actually the easiest.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Not the easiest, but because the key piece of that is apologizing and making amends.
Mm,
It's not the feeling bad. So what I might suggest to somebody like your friend is, it would be to take a meditation class or to do some emotional backed writing, which is, instead of self-attack, write out all the negative things you might say to yourself. But the minute you've written them out, crumple them up and throw them away as an example of, you don't need to stick with them. Just do something to empty yourself out. And then legitimately ask yourself, what can I do to make it right? If I've hurt somebody, what can I do? So let's say that there's somebody you need to apologize to. Make it sincere. Let's say you did something that harmed them. Make amends if you can. Let's say you can't help them in particular. Do something good for the world.
mm,
Put your attention on what you can heal, not what's wrong with you. That you have to teach yourself to let it go, to be at peace. But it doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to balance the energy. So the feeling piece is useless. After 10 or 20 repetitions,
right.
you're not teaching yourself anything. It's just a habit.
Yep.
So that's the last piece that I would say is, it's just a reminder that we all have habits.
Mm,
And his habit is to be harsh on himself in some way, not to feel his deep and profound disappointment with his behavior. Fine, so do this, but just recognize it's just a habit, that you're choosing to continue that habit, and you can choose another habit if you want to.
mm.
Then you have to do the letting go piece or the positive piece, and then you have to do something positive. You have to make the world right where you made it wrong. So those would be the 3 crucial aspects of self-forgiveness.
Mm. So say the 3 again, if you don't mind. There was the letting go and the positive intention. Those are 2 of them, right?
Well, the last one is make amends and apologize.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard for people because they're in a loop where they think self-criticism means something.
Mm-hmm.
It means absolutely nothing. But it's a habit. But the first piece is relax, be at peace, let it go. Like, let it go. Then, like, you have to talk to yourself. What do I need to do? Like, it's an inner thing.
Mm. And
What?
when you said that this habit is kind of a way to avoid feeling the deep and profound disappointment with his behavior, I think, again, the person I'm thinking of would agree that with that description. And so what to do with that sense of profound disappointment with his behavior? What would you advise when it
Well,
comes to confronting that?
if if it's not enough internally to acknowledge that you really let yourself down and that it may hurt for a while, that disappointment, then it can be helpful to share that with a couple of people. That's another 12-step thing that I'm so disappointed and upset that I did this with me. But it's not a global thing. It's that I did this behavior and it's not right.
Mm.
But the key piece is, again, I need to be willing to apologize, make amends, make it right. It's not the dwelling on it that's important.
Mm.
And that's where most self-forgiveness stuff goes off the rails, because they don't talk enough about the making amends and apologizing. And sometimes even if you feel like you've really harmed people because of a bad habit, you may have to go into therapy or do something to change the habit.
Right.
But that's what self-forgiveness is. It's once you acknowledge the pain, you have to do something.
Right. That's
to make it right.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
I think of like Viktor Frankl's work, and I know you know who he is, but for anyone listening who doesn't, Viktor Frankl is, I consider, a legendary psychologist. He was, captured in the Nazi death camps for 3 years and just wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And one of his key insights is the way that, essentially, as he puts it, despair is suffering without meaning. And that I think that applies to this, because when you do something, like you're saying, when you do something good for the world, because of the fact that you have this disappointment, you're bringing meaning to that disappointment. It now means that you are doing something good for the world, and that someone's life is better because you felt that disappointment in yourself, and therefore that disappointment was not in vain, and it won't bring you to despair, because it led you to do something meaningful. So I just think
and when you don't, things are out of balance.
Mm.
You've taken something, and so the world is out of balance in a certain way.
Yes,
you've given it back. If I've hurt you, or I've done wrong, I have to rebalance life as it is. It doesn't mean that it's unforgivable and that everybody doesn't do these things. It's that just as we're excused and there's mercy for unbalancing, the healing is in rebalancing.
Mm.
But you won't get there without forgiveness, because you'll keep on beating yourself up, or you'll be making excuses your whole life about how, well, the reason I didn't do this is my parents didn't love me enough, or some other nonsense like that. But rather than just, I did what all humans do. I make mistakes, I'm selfish, I'm stupid, maybe I'm in a hurry sometimes. Everybody does that. And the world is meant to come back into homeostasis. We're allowed, but we have to bring it back. And I don't see enough of that at all in any of the descriptions of self-forgiveness, except for the 12-step programs, which it's all about, do a fearless moral inventory and make it right, because that's what matters.
Beautiful.
What makes self-forgiveness easier than other forgiveness is you can do that. When other people have harmed you, you have no control over their behavior. You have very strong control over your own.
Right. Well, we've reached our hour-long conversation, and I just want to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for many things. I mean, I think you to me were kind of one of those mentors who didn't know he was my mentor. I just really I just observed you and absorbed a lot from you and continue to do so. And I just appreciate the way that, you know, you bring a scientific approach to happiness. And I mean, you taught a happiness class at one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, at Stanford. And that's what the world needs, is like taking these, you know, happiness and human well-being very seriously, like looking at a
I agree. I do agree. It's, I wish there were much more of that stuff being taught.
Well, thank you for doing it, and you inspire me to, you know, do that too. So I appreciate it, and I'm so glad that everyone listening heard this whole conversation.
It's very kind of you, Nick. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The reason that you came to me was because of the Sophia like REC thing, right?
That, you know, exactly. It basically dawned on me that, you know, I'm already in communication. Fred Luskin's been approving my own research. I have his email.
There you go.
He might just be willing to join me on my podcast. So,
what, are you teaching at Sophia too?
Right. Yeah.
For what program?
For the transpersonal psychology bachelor's degree program, the bachelor's continuation program. And I actually didn't have an appointment this semester, but the past couple semesters I have. And so I taught like eco-psychology, I taught transpersonal psychology to the bachelor's psychology students.
And what other schools do you teach for?
Currently San Jose City College and Gavilan College.
And where?
Gavilan College, which is San Jose
Gilroy?
In Gilroy, that's right.
How'd you get started in Gilroy?
Well, I'm a Gilroy native, so I had, but I mean that actually didn't have much to do with my starting to teach there. I mean originally I also practice yoga a lot, and so I actually started teaching yoga for them while I was still in graduate school, and I was in, and then I completed my PhD.
You were born in Gilroy?
I was.
Wow. I mean, God knows. How old are you?
34.
So that would, you know, not that different in time. Kids would have been a little older, but I was the school psychologist for San Benito High School.
Okay.
In Hollister.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was what I did, about 30 years ago.
Oh, wow. Look at that connection. And San Benito is where the jail is. So I know, you know, there's a county jail there, and that's the jail where I work.
Wait, you work at the Hollister jail?
I do.
Where do you live?
I live in Gilroy.
Wow. Now, I mean, this is small world stuff, because for a year, when I was the school psychologist, they had almost no mental health services then in San Benito County. Mm-hmm. And so I was one of the night on-call, like, crisis workers who would meet people at the jail to assess their lethality or their suicidality. That in Hazel Hawkins Hospital, the police would bring them in, and I was one of the people who did assessments the middle of the night. Isn't that? It's
That's,
just.
wow, look at that connection. I love it. I
I
love
liked Hollister a lot. It's gotten built up almost beyond recognition
it.
from what it was when I was there, but I liked it a lot. I
I
mean,
do
you grew
too.
up in Gilroy back when there was much more, like produce being
Yeah.
grown, and
Yes, the city of Gilroy has transformed since I grew up, and I'm glad I grew up when I did. You know, it was just much more of I don't know. I guess it was a small town feel with plenty of space for
right,
young kids and
exactly,
teenagers like me to roam.
exactly.
Yeah,
And it was just becoming a San Jose bedroom community.
precisely.
I
Yeah,
know. Because when I worked at San Benito High School, I mean, they had been working those fields for generations, and Main Street in Hollister, where Tres Pinos was, was nothing.
mm, yeah.
Interesting. So you still live in Gilroy, huh?
Yeah, I kind of circled back around to it and, you know, spent some time living in Sacramento and San Jose, but yeah, I'm back in Gilroy and I love it. I mean, it's a sweet spot. I really believe that it's a sweet spot of a place to live in the world, just with its, you know, geographically, where it's
I
just
can
so close to so
understand
many
that. And I think that's what I felt living in
things.
Hollister. That it was close to where it was crazy and crowded, but it was not crazy and crowded.
Exactly.
Anyway, Nick, you did a good job.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll be in touch again. I'll probably propose another research study to you sometime soon and we'll be in contact.
What do you do before I go? What do you do for the jail?
I would describe what I do as an educator and a counselor. I think those are the best descriptors. I meet with small groups of inmates and sometimes one-on-one, but usually it's groups of between 2 and 10. And on paper, I'm teaching a personal development class.
Yeah, because
And
you're not a therapist, right?
correct, correct. And so yeah, I'm really, you know, my role is as an educator, but what we do is we discuss, you know, very personal matters just but in a kind of an educational approach. So we talk about emotions, emotional intelligence, motivation, intelligence in general, discipline.
Did you make the class, or is it something that they had that you're teaching?
A little bit of both. There was something in place by the time that I was offered the job, and then I was able to modify the curriculum.
Oh, that's cool. Good
It,
for you,
it,
my friend.
thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love it. It is good for me. I think I'm a good fit for it, and it's very directly impactful on people who really need some help. So it's really
And
meaningful.
and and one of the truths that I know is that education can be just as valuable as therapy. You
Mm,
can teach a lot through education.
mm.
Um, it, it, it's a very cost-effective and useful method for helping people.
It's a good way to put it. And interestingly, in the jail too, I feel like there's a certain aversion to the idea of therapy, especially with like, you know, young gangsters. And but the idea of like, I'm just going to take a class, it doesn't have the same stigma around it in their subculture. So it actually
How
is
big
quite
is
perfect.
how big is their jail? When I was there, I'm sure it was an older version. It was really small.
Yeah, it's interesting you ask because they literally just built a huge expansion onto it. And
Okay,
so and that is about to open in a couple of months. So currently it's still relatively small. There's maybe 170 inmates in there, so quite
there
small.
wasn't anywhere near that
Oh, I
then.
see. So it's even grown since then. But the new capacity is probably, you know, they'll be able to fit 300 or 400 people in there. So
Wow. Where is the jail located?
It's like right off of Highway 25. It's on Flynn Road. And yeah, just kind of right before you get onto the main street in Hollister from Gilroy.
Yeah, I think the jail was on the main street of Hollister back in the day. As you came up towards the high school on the right,
Yeah,
that's what I remember, but I can't be sure.
I see. Yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah, but I did this 30 years ago, so the whole Silicon Valley was just coming to start then. And so it was this dusty Western town
Mm,
that was being forced to accommodate a
right,
whole degree of changes.
right.
There's so much change. Did you go to Gilroy High School?
I did.
And
Yeah.
that's how you ended up in Gavilan College?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that. Anyway, I got to go. Good luck to you. And you, again, you did a good job with the interview, so I wish you well.
Thank you so much.
If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe.